A dragon king once begged an emperor to save his life. The emperor gave him his word. He kept the man chosen to execute the dragon beside him until the appointed hour had passed. The executioner never left the room. And yet, before sunset, the Dragon King was dead. His severed head fell from the sky and crashed into the streets of Chang'an. To understand how a sleeping minister killed a god and how that death helped begin the journey to the west, we must return to a fisherman on the banks of the Jing River. In ancient China, dragons were not seen as monsters. They were divine rulers. They governed rivers, commanded the rain, and watched over the countless lives that depended on their waters. Beneath every great river lay a hidden kingdom, and upon its throne sat a dragon king. The ruler of the Jing River was proud, powerful, and accustomed to obedience. Then a fisherman began stealing from his domain. The fisherman's name was Zhang Shao. Every morning he cast his nets into the Jing River. Every evening he returned with a catch so large that the other fishermen could scarcely believe it. They called him fortunate. But luck had nothing to do with it. In Chang'an lived a fortune teller named Yuan Shucheng. For the price of a single fish, Yuan told Zhang Shao exactly where to cast his nets and precisely when the fish would gather. His predictions never failed. Day after day, the fisherman followed his instructions. Day after day, the river surrendered another impossible catch. Eventually, Zhang Shao became careless. Proud of his success, he revealed the secret behind it. He did not realize that someone beneath the water was listening. When the Dragon King heard what had happened, he was furious. The fish of the Jing River belonged to his domain. Their movements should have been known only to the spirits and officials who served beneath him. Yet somehow, a mortal fortune teller understood the river's secrets well enough to guide a fisherman to them again and again. At first, the Dragon King's anger could be mistaken for concern. His subjects were being taken from his waters. But the longer he brooded, the less the matter had to do with protecting them. A mortal had known something a god did not. To the Dragon King, that was not merely suspicious, it was humiliating. He left his palace beneath the river, concealed his horns and royal crown, and took the form of a white-robed scholar. Then he entered Chang'an to test the fortune teller for himself. He found Yuan Shucheng beneath a willow tree, calmly receiving visitors. The disguised Dragon King stepped forward. "Will it rain tomorrow?" Yuan looked at him and answered without hesitation. "Yes." The Dragon King smiled. Rain was not uncommon. Any fraud could make such a prediction and hope that chance proved him right. So the Dragon King asked for more. At what hour would the rain begin? At what hour would it end? How much water would fall? Yuan answered every question. He named the time of the first cloud, the time of the final drop, and the exact measure of rain that would descend upon Chang'an. The Dragon King could barely contain his satisfaction. Only one being controlled the rain over the Jing River. Him. The fortune teller had unknowingly placed his reputation in the hands of the very god who could prove him wrong. The Dragon King proposed a wager. If Yuan's prediction came true, he would reward him. But if even one detail proved false, Yuan would tear down his stall and leave Chang'an in disgrace. Yuan accepted. The Dragon King returned to his underwater palace, certain that he had already won. Then, a messenger descended from heaven. The celestial envoy carried a decree from the Jade Emperor. The Dragon King was ordered to send rain over Chang'an the following day. The decree named the exact hour the rain must begin, the exact hour it must end, and the precise amount of water that must fall. Every detail matched Yuan Shucheng's prediction. The Dragon King read the decree again. There was no mistake. The mortal had not guessed. Somehow, he had known the will of heaven before the Dragon King himself received it. Now the Dragon King faced a choice. He could obey the decree and lose a wager to a mortal, or he could alter heaven's command. The first choice would cost him a little gold. More painfully, it would cost him his pride. The second choice would violate celestial law. For a wiser ruler, the decision would have been simple, but pride has a way of making small humiliations feel greater than mortal danger. The next day, rain fell over Chang'an, but it did not begin at the appointed hour. It did not end when heaven had commanded, and the amount of water was not what the decree had ordered. To the people below, it was only rain. The streets darkened, water ran from the rooftops, the fields drank, life continued. But in heaven, the alteration was seen for what it was. A divine official had deliberately changed an imperial decree, not to protect his kingdom, not to save lives, but to win a petty wager. The Dragon King had used the power of his office to defend his pride. Judgment came swiftly. He was sentenced to death. The following morning, the Dragon King returned to Yuan Shucheng's stall. He came expecting victory. The rain had not matched the prediction. The fortune teller, he believed, was now exposed. But Yuan showed no fear. He looked at the white-robed stranger and addressed him by his true rank. The Dragon King froze. Yuan knew who he was. He knew the decree had been changed, and he knew the punishment already waiting in heaven. Tomorrow, at noon, Yuan told him, you will be executed. The Dragon King's confidence vanished. Only a day earlier, he had believed himself untouchable. He ruled a river kingdom. Mortals prayed for his favor. Storm clouds moved at his command. Now none of it mattered. For the first time, the Dragon King understood that divine power did not make him free. It only gave him a higher position within a greater order, and that order had condemned him. He fell to his knees before the man he had come to humiliate. He did not claim innocence. He did not defend his actions. He simply did not want to die. Yuan Shucheng offered him one desperate hope. The man appointed to carry out the execution was Wei Zheng, one of the most trusted ministers of Emperor Taizong. Wei Zheng served heaven, but in the mortal world, he also served the emperor. If Emperor Taizong could keep Wei Zheng occupied until noon had passed, perhaps the execution could be prevented. That night, the Dragon King entered the emperor's dreams. He no longer appeared as the proud ruler of the Jing River. He came terrified and desperate. He told Taizong of the sentence and begged him for protection. The emperor was moved. As long as Wei Zheng is my minister, Taizong promised, I will not allow him to leave my sight. The Dragon King believed him. The following morning, Emperor Taizong summoned Wei Zheng to the palace. He kept the minister beside him through matters of state. As noon approached, the emperor brought out a game board. The two men sat opposite one another. Taizong moved slowly. He delayed simple choices and prolonged every exchange. As long as Wei Zheng remained in the room, the Dragon King should have been safe. Far above the mortal world, however, the execution platform was already prepared. Celestial soldiers brought the Dragon King forward in chains. He looked toward the world below. Somewhere inside the palace, the emperor had promised to save him. Back in Chang'an, Wei Zheng studied the game board. Sunlight crept across the palace floor. Noon drew closer. The emperor continued playing. Then Wei Zheng's movements slowed. His eyes closed, his head lowered. He had fallen asleep. Taizong looked at the sleeping minister and felt relief. Wei Zheng had never left the palace. The appointed hour had arrived, and the executioner was sitting harmlessly before him. A sleeping man could not wield a sword. But Wei Zheng served two courts. His body remained beside the emperor. His spirit opened its eyes in heaven. There, above a sea of clouds, he stood not as a mortal minister, but as a celestial executioner. A sword forged by heavenly authority waited in his hands. The Dragon King knelt before him in chains. Even then, he searched the mortal world below. He was still waiting for the emperor to save him. Then, he saw Wei Zheng step onto the platform, and he understood. The emperor had kept the executioner's body in the palace. but no earthly ruler could imprison his soul. Wei Zheng raised the sword. Lightning split the sky. The blade fell. Inside the palace, Wei Zheng awoke. Before Emperor Taizong could question him, officials rushed into the room with impossible news. Something had fallen from the clouds. A severed dragon's head had crashed into the streets of Chang'an. Its mane was still wet with rain. A broken royal crown clung to its horns, and its eyes remained open. Not with anger, with disbelief, as though, even in the final moment, the Dragon King had still expected the Emperor's promise to save him. That night, water appeared across the palace floor. The lamps went dark one by one. Then a voice emerged from the shadows. "I waited for you." The ghost of the Dragon King stood before Emperor Taizong, carrying his own severed head. Taizong insisted that he had kept his word. Wei Zheng had never left his sight. The Dragon King answered that he had seen the hour arrive. He had seen the minister raise the sword, and until the final instant, he had believed the Emperor would intervene. To Taizong, the promise had been kept. To the Dragon King, a promise that ended in his death was no promise at all. Night after night, the ghost returned. The Emperor could command armies, punish officials, and rule millions of people. But he could not command the dead to leave him in peace. His health declined. Sleep abandoned him, and eventually, Emperor Taizong closed his eyes for what seemed to be the final time. When he opened them again, the palace was gone. His crown was gone. His guards were gone. He stood in the underworld. In life, countless people had knelt before him. Here, no one called him Your Majesty. Among the gathered spirits stood the Dragon King of the Jing River, demanding justice. The Dragon King had believed his divine rank placed him above the law. The Emperor had believed his earthly authority could outmaneuver heaven. Now both stood before a court greater than either of them. There is always a higher throne. There is always another judgment. And no title, mortal or divine, can protect someone forever. Emperor Taizong was eventually permitted to return to the living world. But he returned changed. He remembered the suffering souls he had seen below. He remembered a realm where wealth, armies, and imperial power meant nothing. To bring peace to the dead, he commissioned a grand Buddhist ceremony. A monk named Xuanzang was chosen to lead it. But the scriptures needed for the ceremony were incomplete. To obtain the true teachings, Xuanzang would have to travel west. Far ahead on that road, beneath a mountain sealed by the Buddha, a monkey was waiting. The greatest journey in Chinese mythology did not begin with the Monkey King's rebellion. It did not begin with a battle against demons. It began with a fisherman who knew where to cast his net, a fortune teller who knew when the rain would fall, a dragon king too proud to lose a wager, and an emperor who discovered that he could hold a sleeping man's body, but not his soul. From that single act of pride, the road to the west was opened, and the journey to the west began.